Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I am your host, Amanda, and I am so glad you are here. This is a space for dance teachers and anyone interested in teaching dance who is looking for motivation and fresh ideas. As teachers, we spend our days motivating and giving pep talks to our students, and now this podcast is a pep talk just for you. We hope that it helps to ignite new ideas and even work through some deep dance related thoughts before you head into the studio. Thank you for your support, and now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everybody. I am so excited for you to listen to today's episode because today I have a conversation with one of my very best friends, Jill Krysil. I have known Jill since, oh my gosh, I think it was first grade, maybe kindergarten, but we have been friends for a long time. We have known each other for the majority of our life, and we have been there for each other through so many of life's ups and downs. And we have such a beautiful friendship. I really will say this, that it is such a supportive, such a caring, such a present friendship. No matter the years that pass, no matter where life takes us, we always return back to that same place whenever we talk. And it's also a friendship of creative inspiration, and some of the conversations we have, it just always blows my mind. Some of the ideas that we talk about and the feelings that I'm left with afterwards, because it always brings such joy to my heart. And I know that it's not just our friendship, but I know that Jill does this for so many other people. She is such an inspiring force, and she is also an educator. And that is why I wanted to have her here on the podcast, because you are just going to be, I think, so inspired by what she has to say. Aside from all of this, Jill and I grew up dancing together. And I think it's really true what they say about those dance friends that are forever friends or lifelong friends, because that for sure is Jill for me. Growing up, we were definitely a pair of energy for sure in our dance classrooms, but we had so much fun, and that was what it was all about. And all of my dance memories, she is a part of, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. I am always so inspired by her and wanted to bring her on the podcast because, as I mentioned, Jill is an educator. She taught dance a little while through her early career, and now she is really focused on teaching. She is a second grade teacher, and she is also a presenter for Responsive Classroom. Responsive Classroom is something that I've always had a big interest in because I myself went to school for education, and I absolutely love the message that it has, because it's not just about helping your students to learn and to achieve and to grow, but it's about helping them in the entire well-being and outlook of them. So you're also talking about emotional well-being. You're talking about social well-being. It's the whole picture. It's not just the performance results from the test taking. It's about setting up these students not only for a lifetime of success, but also to have tools and tips for themselves that they'll be able to use through the years in mindfulness practices and interactions, communication. There's just so much involved in the responsive classroom model, and I'm so excited for her to explain more about it and how we can use it in our dance classrooms, because even though sometimes in our dance classrooms we may only have a class for 1 hour a week, that 1 hour is still so powerful. And the other benefit that we have as dance teachers too is we get to a lot of the time have students for years and years and years at a time. And so we're not only nurturing their growth as dancers, but we are also having a huge part in their growth emotionally, socially, just developmentally in different ways. And so to have extra tools in our pocket of how to do this in a safe manner, in a warm and nurturing manner, I just think is so important. Jill received her undergraduate degree from UMass Amherst in Spanish and education, and she went on to receive her master's degree in education at Smith College. I can't wait to get into today's episode, so let's jump right in about responsive classroom methods and how we can incorporate it in the dance classroom with Jill Krysil. Hi, Jill. I am so glad that you could do this episode for Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I just feel like you have so many valuable ideas that we can bring into our dance settings. And so I know you very well, but can you share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm Jill Krysil, and I'm a second grade teacher, and I also do some presenting for Responsive Classroom, and also I have a 2-year-old son at home.
Yay, I am so glad you are here. You know, the background that you have and the amount of work and time that you've had with young children, not only as your students, but your own. I just feel like you have a wealth of knowledge to share, and especially when it comes to responsive classroom, because I am a little bit aware of what responsive classroom is, having gone to school for teaching, but most dance teachers, a lot of them have so many different tracks to getting to where they are. So as a dance teacher, you could go to school for dance, you could go to school for education, some do business, some may not even go to college and they go on to a professional career or they do different things like that. So the track to being a dance teacher is so different. And I see so much value in what responsive classroom is. And so speaking on that, I know you mentioned that you are a presenter for responsive classroom. And so that's really why I wanted to, talk with you today, because the dance classroom can be such an enriching and supportive environment. And I know there are so many tools that we can do this with. And my thought with all of this is responsive classroom. I'm so curious, how can this look or be adapted in the dance setting? And, can you tell us a little bit about what responsive classroom is and its principles?
Of course. So, responsive classroom is a student-centered social emotional approach to teaching and learning. It's, a number of evidence-based practices that really help to foster a joyful learning community. And there's so much transfer, I think, between the classroom and the dance studio. I've done trainings for bus drivers and other staff at our school. It's just great practices for working with children in general. So it consists of these four domains, which are positive community, engaging academics, developmentally responsive teaching, so knowing who our students are developmentally and thinking about those characteristics when we teach them, and also effective management. So really like anybody can incorporate these practices in their work with children. Yeah, so I definitely recommend. I've also like done a little bit of dance teaching like in the past and like it's definitely helped me.
I absolutely can see that. And something that is so unique, and I know like we have a long dance history together, but when you said student led or student focused, student centered learning, like to me, like in past ideas of the dance classroom, that is really not necessarily the model that it is. It is very much like you have the teacher and then you have the students, and there isn't as much interaction in a kind of like a community building based way, but yet I feel that when we do that, it creates so much more belonging in a way that we're in this together, we're here together, we're all working towards common goals in our own individual pathways and things like that. So to me, when you talk about responsive classroom, like it's not really the model that is in a dance studio, but I feel it's extremely important to start to look at that because, when you said student focused, I think when everybody, when you're thinking about being a teacher, you're wanting to reach every student in your class. You're not wanting to just address the class as a whole. We're looking at the individuals. And I think this is such a great tool to be able to do that with.
It's really powerful for creating community and sharing, that power. And so exactly what you said about belonging, that's a huge component of responsive classroom, making sure students and dancers feel like they belong and it's not like just the teacher holding all the power, but sort of sharing that.
Yeah, I love it. It's that collaborative energy. I think that was what I was kind of trying to go for is collaborative. And because, I'm also one of the mindsets, and I'm sure we'll get into more of this as we go through the conversation, but, I don't want to be like the teacher that's like enforcing the rules and like this and that, and everything is rigid and like this and that, because I think if we're all like doing our part and being there for reasons of togetherness and helping each other to grow and having safe spaces for each other to grow and things like that, I just feel like progress in our learning can be so much bigger or so much larger than if we didn't have that.
Definitely.
So since, in a dance classroom, I know you know this from your experience and the teaching that you have done in dance settings and even like the yoga teaching that you've done, because I know that you've also done that as well. A lot of the time we are not spending a whole day in the class. We are sometimes only having our students for an hour a week. And so with that, it's a short amount of time. And we have all of our technique content that we want to give and the skills that we're learning and all of that. But how do you think we could model responsive classroom in a short span, even if you were to pick like 3 practices to focus on in our dance setting?
Sure. So, one really big component of responsive classroom is a morning meeting. So, each morning we start our day with a, 15 to 30-minute morning meeting where we greet each other, we share, we do an activity, and we read a message to preview the day. So, of course, in an hour dance class, you wouldn't have time to go through all of that and do all those components. But really, the core of morning meeting is just doing a check-in with students, making sure they feel seen and valued, maybe incorporating a little bit of like a question or a share to get to know students, and just setting the tone for the rest of the class. So even like if you think about specialists in a school setting, so music teachers, art teachers, they can incorporate some small components of morning meeting just as a dance teacher might, doing a quick greeting or a quick check-in or a quick share before you get started. So morning meeting or a shortened version of some sort of dance meeting or evening meeting would be powerful. And then my other top practice that I love is teacher language. So, what we say and how we say it, and using positive words and speaking really clearly to really get the most out of our students can go a long way. And then my third, which I feel like dance teachers are doing all the time, is interactive modeling. So this is a special process of modeling. So instead of just giving verbal instructions, which students tend to tune out, like really showing them exactly what a behavior or a dance skill or any sort of even like a social emotional skill would look like, and then gathering feedback about what did you notice that I did from the students, not just you telling them what to do, but asking them what they noticed, is also a really powerful way to teach new skills.
Yeah, I really feel that that could also kind of relay into, when we're asking for questions, because a lot of the time it's kind of even like a meme that goes around, but it's like you teach your thing and then you're, anybody have any questions? Or like, all those things. And we're always asking these things. We're interacting with our students in this manner. And I feel like when we have these models or these practices set up, it may leave the students feeling more comfortable to be able to ask these questions. Whereas maybe before they'd be too nervous to ask. And so when you were speaking on like the interactive component, I think it comes back to that like collaboration, or what is it that we were, asking our question on, what are you looking to have answered? And actually, when I was interviewing Sadie Guthrie a couple episodes back, she had used the term reciprocated energy, and I thought that was like such a great term. It's something that I've like really stuck with too, because it's not just the energy the teacher is giving off, it's not just the energy the students are giving off, but it's the energy together, the interaction together.
Exactly. And creating like safe spaces where all students can feel heard and valued, not just the ones that, are like often sharing out. So what are some ways we can invite that discourse and collaboration and energy? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because even within a classroom setting, even though a lot of the time all of the dancers are there because they're signing up to be there, like whereas in a school setting, it's kind of an expectation that you're going to school. But in a dance setting, everybody's signing up to be there, but you're still absolutely right. There is still those dancers within the class that are more of like the more vocal presence, like the ones that are answering the questions a lot of the time. And then those who are more, withdrawn, not answering the questions. But this whole system, I think, was set up for everyone feeling comfortable to ask that. So speaking on students, student progress, just being aware of the students in your classroom, prior to this had sent me a lot of the presentations that you've given, and something that really stuck out to me was a slide that said, know where they were, see where they are, prepare for where they are going. And I really love this concept because, in the dance world, we are always thinking about that, or it's really important as educators to be aware of this. when we're creating our plans, our pathways, tracks, for our dancers, not just as a class, but as individuals. And so I'm curious because I know as a school teacher, you are responsible for seeing the individual within your large group. And same thing in the dance classroom. I know we can have varying class sizes, but are there any like tips that you have about how to be more aware of individual progress or to kind of monitor their progress, especially within the responsive classroom model? Maybe others that need more support or more of our presence and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so teachers have lots of different systems and ways of getting to know their students individually. One really great strategy I've seen a lot of teachers use is just using like simple class lists, and taking notes that way, not only about, their students' progress, but also their interests or moods or whatever's going on outside of school and keeping track of that. And then I know you have talked before about goal setting too, but being really transparent about that. So setting goals with your students, either on an individual level, monitoring their progress along with them, whenever possible, or if it's a group goal, checking in periodically about, how things have been going and gathering feedback around that. And this quote too that you talked about also reminds me a lot about getting to know our students from a developmental perspective. So Responsive Classroom has a publication called Yardsticks, and it's all about the different developmental stages of students. So that's also really helpful in getting to know students. I mean, these characteristics aren't necessarily always true, like not all 8-year-olds are the same and not all 11-year-olds are the same, but there are certain patterns that we can expect to show up. So like if we have 6 and 7-year-olds, we know that they have a lot of energy and they need to move their bodies. So a reasonable expectation would be to, well, it's dance, but to incorporate movement and not expect them to sit still for too long. And then for our 13 and 14-year-olds, we know that they're figuring out who they are in the world. A lot of times they want to know why they're learning something, or sometimes they might sort of want to debate or question. So we might start lessons with talking about, why we're learning this or why we're doing this ahead of time, is going to pay off in the end.
Yeah, I remember Yardsticks as a textbook for elementary education, and I'm sure the publication that I have is outdated at this time. But do you feel, Yardsticks, is that a resource that we can find? Like, is it accessible on Amazon?
Definitely. And I've recommended it even to families, so not just educators. It's really easy to read. And there's like actionable sort of things and just kind of overview of things you could expect, with physical development, social, emotional. And yeah, there has been like updated editions of it because of like social media has an influence on these sort of things as well. So it's a really easy read and just like great to have to reference.
Yeah, that's such a great point. When you said it or when you had sent it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to pull mine out. But then I realized, like you just said, social media has definitely changed a lot for the students that we currently have. And as teachers, I do feel it's so important to have an awareness of that social emotional learning as well, that they're not just coming in here to learn dance. We also have to support them where they are. And I think it's so important to have that knowledge because, like you said, when you're looking at different age groups, you're going to teach them differently because they expect differently. But knowing how to support them, especially too with the changing times and things that they're being exposed to and that are a part of their world, how we can, like I said, better support them. Because as an extracurricular, I think we do have a big role in that because we can really take the time to be present with them, because I know also too we get the opportunity to have some of these students every year, and sometimes every year from elementary school to high school graduation, and it's kind of like a really beautiful journey that we get to do that. But I also feel like we should, as dance teachers, do our part and make sure that we are facilitating that support in the best way possible.
Yes, I love that.
All right. So now I know, so we were just talking about yardsticks. I will put that link in the show notes and any other resources that you think would be good for us for this. So I just want to make sure I mention that if people are thinking, "Ooh, I need to remember that," it'll all be in the show notes. So I know that you mentioned as a pillar of responsive classroom being teacher language. And I do wholly agree that it is so important that we are aware of how we're speaking with our children. And I know that you and I feel that same way, even how we're speaking with our own children, and just, the way that we interact and the way that we guide or redirect and things like that. And so I would love your input on teacher language that we should be using as dance teachers. And I know there is a lot to it. I know there are many categories. I think there were like at least 5 different categories of teacher language. So I'm just curious, how do you think these play into dance? And, what would be your big ones that we may use in the dance classroom?
Sure. So, yeah, teacher language is my favorite aspect of responsive classroom. It's something that I'm constantly working on and thinking about. So, like the words we say, how we say them, even our body language, students can pick up on like really subtle cues if we like say something but kind of roll our eyes. So being like really positive and clear and concise, and sometimes also like not talking so much, like the less we say, like the more students hear. So yeah, there's a bunch of different language types. So the first one is envisioning language, and that's really helping students imagine themselves and behaving and achieving in ways like beyond their current reality. So in the dance world, that might sound like, during this past performance, you did so well with XYZ. That will help you as we prepare for, whatever in the future, and just helping them kind of envision. Sometimes I say like language as a crystal ball or language as a spyglass, helping them see the future and picture the future. The next one is reinforcing. So this one's really huge in just naming student strengths. So one of my colleagues says like the 3-to-1 rule. So trying to use 3 reinforcing language or positive language to every 1 redirection can be really powerful for students. And when we're reinforcing, we're saying sentence starters like, I notice, or I see, the student is doing this, XYZ, in place of I like. So it's not about like making your dear teacher happy, and saying I like or I love the way, just saying like replacing that with what you notice. And again, with feedback, I'm sure you've heard about like, not moving away from saying good job, but like being really specific and like what exactly the student is doing well, just helps them see that for themselves. The next one is reminding language. So this one is for when a student is just sort of like starting to go off track, you're noticing like a little bit of, misbehavior. So again, we're being really clear with our words. We're saying like, show me this, think about this, what will help you to do this, what will we need to remember as we're preparing for this, performance, just using some reminding there. Redirecting language. So that's, when the misbehavior might be ramping up or something's getting to be unsafe, we're being like really direct and specific. And here too, if we're being really direct and specific, we're taking out like pleases and thank yous, which is like really hard for some people because like manners are really important. But again, like if we're being really clear and concise, saying like, please stop doing this or thank you, it would be great. Like we want to be really clear in that moment so that students know what they're expected to do. And then there's 2 other like not necessarily responsive classroom language types, but language I like to think about. And the first one is relating. So building empathy for students, whether it's when they're probably like when they're going through a hard time, and just like really saying, I see you're feeling, or I think you're feeling like this way. I felt that way before too. And again, it just really builds that empathy and connection to help students feel seen. And then the next one is reframing. So this is when your student might be having some like negative thinking or like inaccurate negative thinking, and just helping them to reframe that. So saying like, oh, I wonder if like or like if a student says like, I'm horrible at this, I'm never going to be good at doing, whatever skill you're working on, just helping them kind of reframe and see the bigger picture. Like, could it be this? Or I wonder if it's this, can help students just have that more positive self-image. Like I have that quote in my head, like the way we speak to children becomes their own self-talk and like how they see themselves. So just like keeping that in mind with how we speak to students.
Yeah, this was honestly such an important reminder and eye opener for me because some of the things that you spoke on, I kind of wanted to just, go off on because I feel that there are probably other dance teachers that are in the same boat. And I think it is so important that we are aware of the language that we're using because as you said, it even may come down to like the body language that we use. Like if we're somebody that maybe uses sarcasm at times, there might be students, especially developmentally, that might not be something that we all can pick up on, and maybe it would be misinterpreted. And I do think that also when you were speaking on, I think it was reinforcing, when you were talking about like pleasing the teacher when we're using good job or things like, or I think I like that, or I am so bad. Okay, this is definitely one I need to work on because I will always be like, I love that. Oh, amazing. Like I am always cheering on, but it becomes this like outside validation that I don't think is necessarily always helpful. And I did notice this a lot during improv because I had this realization a couple of years ago where I would comment on their improv and, say things like, this was absolutely beautiful, or I loved that you did this. And it was the languages that you were just saying that are like pleasing tendencies. And then I realized like, I cannot give feedback like that to the improv because, especially when it comes to improv, that's their own style and that is their own artistry. And so there really is no judgment on that. There's no right way. There's not a beautiful way or, oh, I didn't really like that. There's not either of that because with improv, it's specifically for the dancer. So I realized like I cannot really critique improv in that way. And so the language that you used even is very helpful for me to be like being specific about the things that they are doing and not putting my opinion on it or like my love and like for it. Because for me, I always thought like, oh, I'm just cheering them on, like I'm being supportive. And yeah, but like I'm also giving, like you said, it's just like, oh, that one time that I don't say I love that, are they going to be then thinking, oh, she didn't really like that. That wasn't that good because she didn't give us that big reaction that I always tend to do.
Right. And it's not like there's not a space for that. Like it's not like you can't ever say great job or you can't ever say I love that. And just again, like either following that up with something more specific. And remember too, like changing language patterns is really, really hard. And it takes practice and it takes time. So a couple suggestions that, I offer to you and to other people that want to think more about the language they're using with students or children they work with is one is like having a little like if it's on your clipboard or like a little card with some sentence prompts that you want to try replacing or like some words you anticipate you might want to use. And the other one, and like a lot of people like really cringe about this, but is about like videoing yourself or like recording yourself during instruction or during a dance class. And then I know people hate it, but like listening to their own voice and like playing it back afterwards and noticing like how much reinforcing language did you use versus how much redirection? Who did you give feedback to? Who did you not give feedback to? Things like that can be really helpful when you're shifting your language patterns.
Yeah, those are great tips and definitely ones to implement for sure, especially when it is so important to be aware of the language because like you said, when you use that quote is the voice that we are using and the way that we're speaking can be the voice that becomes a part of the dancer, the student. It's in their head. And, there are always things that we're going to remember that people said to us and the way they say things to us more importantly, truly, is the way they say things and how we feel after that. And so I do feel that being more aware is so helpful. So I love the tips that you just gave. I'm going to try the video one. I know it's a little like scary to see yourself teaching, I think, but I think it's really important, especially when it is for the students, it's for the benefit of the students. So
Yeah, and another thing I've been wondering about around feedback, and I remember when I was in dance, feedback was very public. So like the teacher was saying it in front of the whole class. Um, and so I've been thinking about, does public feedback foster community? And is there ways in dance within your, big, dance class, is there ways you could move towards giving some more private feedback?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually one that I feel is something that needs to be asked among all dance educators, because what we are realizing as giving feedback and corrections, thinking it as a helpful thing, may also, like you said, not necessarily steer towards building the community, that feeling of safety, because maybe dancers may feel it as a being called out. And I think that there is a lot of work being done around this in the dance world. I've seen a lot of different posts on social media accounts and things like that about really sitting down with students and discussing what corrections are for, why they are given, and all of this. But I agree that, is there a way that we can do this privately? And I know, for my experience, sometimes I give general corrections as a class as a whole. So I will not address one particular student, but I will give the correction to the whole class. Sometimes if I notice a handful of students or like a few students are needing the correction, I will still address it as a whole class situation. And I have said to the class too that the corrections that I give to any person is for everyone, because even if I don't catch you in this need of the correction, you may need that correction, and I just didn't catch my eye there in time. And so, I've heard teachers use that before, and I myself have. I know when going across the floor, like I'm curious of like what your take is on this, because I know private feedback would necessarily be like just that one-on-one with that student. But like sometimes when we're going across the floor, if I notice that a dancer is having a difficult time with picking up a skill or is needing more reinforcement, I will go over to them. I will do it with them. I will kind of like speak quietly next to them or like try to guide them. But yet that is still a public setting. So like, I don't know, what is your input on that?
Yeah, but I feel like that versus like calling them out in front of the whole class like does preserve their dignity. And then if you're giving private feedback, it might not necessarily always be for corrections, but other times you're giving them private feedback, with your reinforcing language about what they did well. So making sure you're balancing that. So if they're like, "Oh, she's talking to the student," like they don't know like what you're talking about. It could, it could look like feedback or corrections. So just thinking about what, and like you'll know your students individually, obviously, by working with them. Some students might like love public praise, or some students might be like, yes, bring it on, like correct me in front of the class. But other students might be really uncomfortable with that. So I don't think it has to be like a general, like one size fits all rule, but knowing what's best for the individuals in your class.
Yeah, and I also think too with, with competition dancers, because as you were asking this question, I was kind of like going to competition mode too in my head. And, if you're a soloist, you are getting feedback from the judges, and that is usually given, at least in my eyes, in a private forum where I am either sitting down with a soloist, listening to the feedback from the judges, or I am sending it to the soloist. But when we're doing group work, sometimes it is really interesting, because sometimes we will get like feedback from the judges, and they may like say like girl in the front right or whatever, and they're specific to a person. And then that's hard, because I do feel in the competitive setting, the group, they all want to do well. And that, yes, they believe in each other, they're a team. But sometimes when that stuff happens, it becomes this feeling for that dancer like, I brought the group down because I was called out for this, such and such. So it's also, I think, a way like of reframing the language in the correction and being aware that, like, okay, if we are giving that individual feedback in front of others, that we're doing it in a really aware way. Like you said, not calling them out, maybe even like pulling in something that they did really well prior. I mean, I don't know if that would help. Like, I love that stretch that you did out of that turn, or there I am saying I love again. Saying, like, saying that stretch you did was so elongated. just make sure that when you're coming out of it, you're really reconnecting to your center on that contraction or something like that, where it's like you're giving something that is positive that was done and then like pulling into the correction. But it's so hard to receive that. I mean, think about it, like even as an adult, like if you were called out in a meeting on something in front of your peers,
Right.
like how would that feel versus like all these students? Like it's the same, it is very uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
something to think about.
It's a tricky balance, but if you've put in the work to set up your community, which it sounds like you have, about like we can all learn from this correction, that's why I'm giving it to everybody. I think you can, there is a place for it.
Okay, great. That is really, really good to know and such an important question to ask because, I mean, if anything, it gets us thinking as educators, it gets us thinking about how we are correcting and how that may change the tone in the environment and how to always maintain that feeling of safe and support because when we're in that safe and supportive setting, we can really move. And if we are unsafe or if we're feeling unsafe, then it's really does limit our body's ability to feel movement in the way that we're wanting to. So,
Exactly.
yes. All right. I know too, you spoke on redirection, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of rules because I really love the idea of stating rules positively. So instead of saying don't do this, stop that, or this. I know you did talk about at times needing to be very clear and not saying thank you, please, because yeah, I definitely do that too. But try this or use this, that type of thing. And I think this could be so effective in our cueing also because instead of saying like, don't sickle your foot, like some dancers might have no clue, like, okay, she's telling me not to sickle. Like, what does that mean? Like, or how do I not sickle? And so reframing the corrections that we're giving in a try this or do this, like how to get there, how to get to the correction that we're looking to give. And even to like direction of misbehavior. So I have written a couple scenarios up and I was curious like how you would address this in a responsive classroom manner with certain situations. So before we get into those, do you have any like rule concept ideas with
I
around
mean, no, you definitely got the concept. The other like just fun example we use when we talk about stating things positively if I say don't think about a pink elephant, like you're probably thinking about a pink elephant. So instead, like you said, like don't sickle your foot, name exactly what you want the student to do. And it just like I think it just codes better in their memory. And I know that one's such a hard one to get away from, but really trying to name exactly specifically what to do versus what not to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I could even think of other ones that I'll try to think of some. Maybe I'll share some on Instagram after like this episode of ways that we can use our corrections and, positively reframe, kind of thing. So, all right. So here are some scenarios. I'm curious
Yeah.
how you can handle this. So the first one, a student is hanging on the bar, not following along with what the class is doing. What do you do?
Yeah, so I would probably start with some sort of visual cue or reminder, whether it's like lifting my hand to the air or some sort of signal we've established for like getting your body back on track. And then if I have the capacity, giving like a private redirection with like a really neutral tone about like, show me what your body should be doing right now.
Okay, yeah. All right, another scenario. Students are speaking while you are speaking. And like even specifically, say we're lined up going across the floor, you are giving the exercise and there are students speaking in the line while you are giving the direction.
So I'd probably start with voices away, like again, like exactly naming what I want to see. So voices away. I'm not going off on this big lecture, blah, 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 blah. I'm just saying voices away, time to listen, being really clear. And then I'm also, ahead of time, like in your first couple weeks of your dance classes, you're establishing expectations around like listening and giving directions and making sure they actually know the expectation and trying to be really consistent with that all year long. Because I know like certain times of the year there's more energy. So just keeping it as consistent as you can around like when the teacher's voice is on, everyone else is listening.
Okay, yes. Another one that I have here is a student is using the props in an unsafe manner around others.
Yeah, so this is when we'd use our redirection language, saying stop. You also, as far as like responding to misbehavior, we might use a logical consequence, like a loss of privilege. So like you're showing me you're not being safe. Let's take a break. And you could practice, next round.
As you were speaking to with some of these scenarios, I remember some of the things you have so many great phrases and things that you do to bring the class back to attention or to like bring the focus back because I've observed you teaching, I've, helped out in your classroom and it's just so amazing to see because it's you are full teacher mode in that moment but I've just picked up on so many amazing things that you say, so can you like share some of the things you say to like bring the class attention back as a whole because you have a lot of good phrases.
Yeah, there's so many fun ones, attention getters that teachers use. So, we do have like a chime or like a bell or some sort of tone that can really center a group. But if you can't stop dance to like, go grab like a bell or a chime from the corner, you can do like sort of call and answer ones. So, with younger students like hocus pocus and the class, shouts back everybody focus or macaroni and cheese and the class answers back everybody freeze and you have modeled how this call and answer works and what the expectations are around that. Teachers do like clapping sort of signals, so like they'll clap 3 times and like the students will clap back twice. There's lots of ways, like in school, like the classic like putting up like the peace sign as your quiet signal, but there's lots of fun ways to get the attention back, especially when like there's lots of talking happening.
Yeah, I feel it's like one of those things when you're doing like an activity like freeze dance or something that's collaborative. There's a lot of energy and we're going and going and going. And then it's like, okay, we have to get everybody back on instead of trying to like yell over them or trying to like corral with like a bunch of words and language. There's the way that you do it is just so effective and it's only a couple of words and it pulls everybody back in that moment. So
Yeah, just making
yeah.
it fun and make sort of gamifying it can help students, regain that self-control.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for those. So I know also that you are really big into mindfulness practices in your teaching that I don't know if that's a part of responsive classroom, like if it has to do with the safety and the community, the emotional development, social development, but do you have any tips too about how you use mindfulness or yoga or any type of like recentering exercises, like maybe when you need to get the energy level to a certain place within your class setting, especially for like your first grade, second grade, third grade, kindergarten student population?
Yes, mindfulness and these yoga tools are so powerful for all students and all dancers. There's so many just like fun and simple ones, even just like fun breathing exercises, so like elevator breath, like breathing in for 3, let's, move our elevator up and then breathe out, 3, 2, 1. There's like, you've seen like the animal breathing activities. And another one that students really love and is really powerful is guided meditations, which I know you do in your classes. And those can be, really playful and imaginative or can help them prepare for an upcoming performance or competition using those meditations to help them, envision themselves and prepare.
Love those. Yes. And I know we've talked a lot about like the school setting and all of that, but a huge part of our past history together is dance. And so I'm so curious, how just to share, with the Dance Teacher Pep Talk community, but how has having had dance in the past influenced aspects of your life and who you are as a teacher?
Totally. I'm really grateful for all of the lessons, like both big and small, that dance has taught me. Definitely big themes around friendship and teamwork and collaborating towards a common goal is still like so alive in my work with others, and my work with my students. And also around like preparation and practice, like being really planful and mindful about, steps and remembering what to do. And then the last one just around like grace and presence and how we carry ourselves in the world. I feel like I learned a lot of that from dance and being a dancer.
Yes, and I definitely agree with all of the things that you said about how dance has influenced your life because I can see that in you. And I also feel so much of what you're saying myself with those different characteristics and how it has influenced us. And I think the other part about it too, like you were speaking on the presence and how we carry ourselves, I feel like we're just, as dancers, I do feel that there is such a level of self-awareness that we have. I don't know if it's because even though it's a team or a classroom kind of vibe or a teamwork type of setting, we are all very much individuals. And I know that we both were very lucky to have our artistry and our style to be supported in the sense of like we were really trying to find the direction for us. And I know that especially like with Jenny, like Jenny's mentoring of us and the opportunities that she gave us for choreography outlets and things like that, we felt a safety and being ourselves and finding ourselves. And I don't know if like other team sports have that because it's like, yes, we're a team, but what is each individual bringing within the team, especially with dance? I don't know. I feel like it relates because maybe there is opportunities to do solo work. There's opportunities, to be on your own for things or to choreograph something on your own for things. And
Yeah,
so
totally. There's something like really special about dance, whether it's like you said, like the individuality and like combined with the collaboration and like music and art is really, really, really powerful and magical.
absolutely. So speaking on that, I know that we really had the opportunity, as we were speaking on, to be really in a community setting with our dance growing up. And I know that that might not always be the case. And so we did earlier on speak about morning meeting and how we could kind of like summarize that into our dance settings. But that's a great way to build community in the space. But do you have any other ideas about ways we can build community? Because I know for our upbringing, that was hugely important because we felt that trust and safety. So, any other ideas around that?
Yeah, so like you said, it really comes down to relationships and community. So like connection before correction and relationships before rigor. And sometimes when doing this work, we get some pushback, like I really don't have time for this social emotional stuff. Like, shouldn't their families teach this? Or like I really need to get to the skills. I really need to get to practicing this. I just don't have time. Um, but I'd love to like challenge people on that and thinking about if we do put the time in intentionally ahead of time, proactively, in the end, we're going to get more out of our students and out of our dancers. So, and it doesn't have to be this like whole big lesson. It's just these really small moves and shifts that have a big impact in the end.
I can always see such a shift when I do take the time to address that. Like, perfect example, I have a class full of high school students in front of me that are absolutely exhausted, laying on the floor because it's finals week and they haven't slept all night and they're just going to school, taking tests all day. And I know in that moment, it's not important for us to focus on skills that day because the bigger picture is that they're needing more support in just their lives in general and more empathy and more compassion for what they're going through. So I'm 100% there with you on that about make the time, make the time to be there for your students. They're going to remember that so much more than how you taught them that like really difficult jump that day. They're going to remember the time that you were there with them.
Right.
So I know you've given us so much insight on your feelings, philosophies, all of that as an educator. But like if there was something specific that, and I know I just kind of mentioned this, looking back, if a student were to look back, what is it that you would like to be known for? Or what would you want to be remembered for with all the work that you do in education?
I would hope that my students feel that sense of belonging, and significance and joy, and really just like hoping they felt like loved and cared for and known, which is no small thing.
Yeah, it definitely takes, like you said, making the time for all of that is, to be there and to establish that is so important. And I know that you do that. And the reason bringing you on, I really hope that that inspires others. And I hope that everybody else takes that question and thinks about it too. What do you want to be known for? And how can you start to bring that into your space today? I think it's really important to be thinking on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited for you and for dance teachers to think about ways to apply this.
Absolutely. So to end, I just have a couple like little fun, quick question type of things to just end this episode and, to have some fun. So it's a little bit of advice, question stuff, and then it's also just some fun stuff. So if you could give any advice to a young dance student, what would it be?
Definitely just have fun and like dance passionately. It's so much more fun to watch a passionate dancer for me than a technically strong dancer. So have fun and just be passionate.
Yes. And I know dance is still a huge part of your life, even just for movement and inspiration in general. So if you like today, if you were going to move to any musical artist or band, who would it be?
So I know you and I both love curating playlists and things like that. So I've recently made a moon themed playlist. So I've been loving Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra, and I always love moving to Odessa as well. And then from one of your jazz playlists, C'est La Vie by Bewitched, always the best.
Always. I still remember the knee shene. Do you remember
Oh,
the knee?
on pavement. We had to do it
Yes.
on pavement.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, I tell that story all the time to my classes. It's so funny. But I love that. And I love the playlist and the curating. And I always think about that too, because it was funny. The other day I was thinking about like how incredible it is to have like Spotify or Apple Music where like I can change up my playlist every day and all I have to do is just drag and drop or like change it up. Or if I wanted to like go back to an old playlist, like I remember, and you were teaching at this time too. It's like we had to make CDs, like burn CDs and like teach our class off of that CD. And you wouldn't make a new CD every week. It would be like you kind of have like your CD for the month or whatever. But I am one that like I like to always like cycle the music. So it's like, oh, but I love that we can do our playlist.
No, I love all your playlists.
And I love all of yours too. Um, So to finish it off today, if you had, and you gave so much advice in this episode, but if there was anything specific that you had as advice for a dance teacher or an aspiring dance teacher, what would it be?
Just really like having grace with yourself, and especially on those bad days, like you don't need to be a superhero, you don't need to be perfect, you don't need to have perfect teacher language. It's okay. And just taking care of yourself, so that you can pour that love into students as well.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Jill. It meant the world to me that you came on to do this episode because I know I get to feel your passion, wisdom, and love for education anytime that we talk, but the world needs to hear it too. So I'm so appreciative of you coming on here today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me, and I'm just so excited to hear how everything goes.
Yay.
There were so many ideas in today's conversation that I think we can immediately start implementing in our classrooms. And something that I really loved about what Jill spoke on is teacher language, because I think it's something that may take a little bit for us to shift from time to time, but it's so very important in the overall scheme of what we're doing. Jill offered some great tips about how we can incorporate different tools in our classroom, and also how we can check in and reflect on the teaching that we're doing and where we can make adjustments for the betterment of our students and for our dancers. So I am so, so grateful that Jill was able to share her knowledge on today's episode. And I'm going to include some important links and information in the show notes about things that Jill spoke on today so that you can dive more into the responsive classroom model and see how it may apply in your dance setting. This week on our Instagram, I'm also going to be sharing some of the ways that Jill explained teacher language and different modeling of behavior situations within a post so that you have a place to return to revisit some of those suggestions and ideas pertaining to the ideas and practices of responsive classroom. I want to thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. If this episode inspired you, I would love it if you would share it with friends and colleagues, because this message of responsive classroom, I think, could reach so far in the dance world. And it only just takes a little bit of adjusting here and there in our classes. And overall, we'll create not only the dancer that we see in front of us, but the whole dancer. Physically, emotionally, socially, developmentally. There's so many aspects of the whole dancer approach that we should be aware of as we are teaching in front of our students. Thank you all again for listening to today's episode. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I'll check in with you next week.